Salutations, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland. Here I am in Limerick, and behind me is a statue of one of Limerick's most famous sons, Richard Harris, who was a renowned actor. And he was born here in Limerick, not very far from where his statue memorialises him, in 1930. And he came from a prominent business family, a part of the shopocracy of Limerick. They owned a flour mill and several sweet shops, those being the days when we didn't hesitate to fill a child's mouth with sugar. We didn't mind about all their teeth rotten out of their head. Not many people who are middle-aged had all their own teeth. We're into people having people's teeth pulled out on the slenderest pretext. So we were the sort of world capital of bad teeth in those days, I'm afraid. We only got into oral hygiene much later, like the rest of the world. But anyway, Richard Harris, he was one of 8 children, and he went to the Crescent School, which is just that away, beyond the building that you can't see. You just have to go on Connell Avenue. It's like a 5-minute walk from here. So a prominent Catholic school. He was from a Catholic family, like most of the city. But he wasn't that academic. He was an exceptionally gifted sportsman. He was a fantastic rugby player in particular, and he might well have played for Ireland. However, an illness in his early 20s put paid to his rugger career. So Limerick's always been a fantastic rugby city, more or less the heartland of Munster rugby. In case you don't know, Ireland's divided into 4 provinces. We're in Munster, so that's the southern one. And even though Cork's got a rather larger population than Limerick, Limerick seems to provide a lot of the talent for Munster rugby. Anyway, Harris, he then turned to all things theatrical, and there wasn't that much of a tradition of thespianism in Limerick, although of course we had a few theatres, and they used to put on like Goldilocks and the Three Bears in the late 1940s. I happen to know that was a popular pantomime here, or were performing Shakespeare plays and so forth. But I'm not sure if there were any drama schools in Ireland, excuse my ignorance, but they weren't very famous, even though we had some splendid theatres, particularly in Dublin, the Gaiety Theatre, the Abbey Theatre and so on, and part of the Gaelic cultural revival, distinctively Irish theatre, not simply performing theatre of plays that were written by English playwrights, writing with an Irish locale, and when dramatis personae were identifiably Irish, even performing in the English language. But anyway, he crossed the water and he enrolled at the London Academy of Music and Drama, Lambda, or as it was in Music and Dramatic Arts. And so he was there in the 1950s when he was discovered by Joan Littlewood, one of the first women to be a prominent theatrical director. And he never looked back, and so he tread the boards in the West End, which is London's theatrical district, and he appeared in a number of films, indeed Hollywood films. And here he is in the guise of, I think it's King Arthur, and he's declaiming the lines, "Peace, not war." So he could perform Shakespearean roles. He was a really versatile actor, he could ad-lib things. He was into more modern pieces. He was a tragedian. He could be a comic actor. I can't think what various things he was in. He was in, he had a bit part in The Lion in Winter? He knew Peter O'Toole was his near contemporary, though Peter O'Toole was possibly born in Connemara, possibly born in England, is not quite sure, but grew up in Leeds. Another Irish actor who's very prominent in England at the time, and it was Harris's coeval. But what else about Richard Harris? Well, he was a noted boulevardier, roistering his way from Limerick to London to New York to Hollywood. So he was very fond of his potations, somewhat got the better of him towards the end. And then in 1970, perhaps his most contentious role, he appeared in the title role of the film Cromwell, which is a highly sympathetic portrayal of Cromwell. That was how he played him, and it was more or less a hagiography, that film. Now, as an Irish Catholic, that was contentious to say the least, because Cromwell is a hate figure here in Hibernia. If something stinks, we say it smells like Cromwell. So he's really regarded as the English Hitler here because of a couple of large-scale massacres at Drogheda and then at Waterford. Although the one in Drogheda, that was actually an English town. Almost everybody there was English, regarded as English by themselves and everyone else. They were Catholics mostly, but there was this large English community on the east coast of Ireland. And those English people who've been resident in Ireland for centuries, they weren't regarded as Irish until the 18th century. And then there was a new fault line in Irish society, who's Catholic and who's a Protestant, not who's Irish and who's English. Now, I know there was never an absolute chasm, because obviously there was intermarriage, and some English immigrants, they adopted our language and our culture, they just blended into the Gaels, but there were others who weren't. Anyway, I mean, you would think he would have got a bit of stick for that at home in Limerick. And he came back from time to time. He famously played Bull McCabe in the field in 1990. He played Marcus Aurelius in Gladiator in 2000, shortly before his death in 2002. So he's brought up conventionally nationalist. He wasn't especially political, but in the early 1970s, he voiced support for the provisional IRA, which he thought would not have gone down terribly well in England. Having said that, thespians over there are so far left, they would almost always take the side of the enemy of their country. So that's why I didn't put paid to his career. Anyway, had he voiced support for, say, loyalism at the same time in Limerick, I think he would have been given short shrift. Anyway, that is Richard Harris, a very famous Limerick man who brought much lustre to his city. So, toodaloo.